a rose-petaled aisle, and a $1,000,000 smile once spelled out a picture-perfect future for Bianca Reynolds. She was radiant on her wedding day, blissfully unaware that the man she adored, the self-made millionaire Timothy Reynolds, harbored darker secrets than she could ever suspect. 2 years later, 6 months pregnant, Bianca found herself begging him for the barest glimmer of compassion. But Timothy's laughter echoed through the marble halls of their mansion, ridiculing her pleas for help and understanding. Little did he know that in one explosive court showdown, his entire world would unravel when his secret mistress was called to testify. Bianca Saunders, an ambitious event coordinator in her mid-20s, first met Timothy Reynolds at the Oakland Charity Gala, a swanky event featuring A-list celebrities and Silicon Valley investors. At the time, Timothy was an up-and-coming entrepreneur who had just sold his startup to a tech giant. Dressed in a sharply tailored Armani suit, he commanded the room's attention with every step. When his eyes landed on Bianca, he saw more than just a fresh-faced coordinator. He saw a woman whose grace and determination mirrored his own aspirations. Timothy introduced himself with a soft smile and a sure handshake. The spark was immediate. They shared a dance, swirling amid crystal chandeliers and the melodic hum of orchestral strings. By the end of the night, it was impossible to miss the chemistry between them. Timothy invited her to brunch at a 5-star hotel the next morning. During that meeting, they discovered their shared love for classical music, philanthropic work, and quiet Sunday mornings. In the weeks that followed, their connection deepened from fleeting flirtations to spirited debates over dinner, from shy confessions to the whirlwind romance that every magazine cover hints at. Bianca's best friend, Carla Martinez, observed the relationship with a mix of delight and hesitation. She knew Bianca's capacity for love was vast, but she also recognized Timothy's raw ambition. He was blazing a trail through California's tech scene, fast attracting attention from the wealthy elite and from would-be opportunists too. Carla wanted to see her friend happy, but worried that Bianca might be a supporting player in Timothy's story, rather than a true partner. Still, Bianca's giddy excitement was contagious, and Carla shelved her concerns for the moment, trusting her friend's intuition. It wasn't long before Timothy's grand gestures swept Bianca off her feet. He whisked her away to Lake Tahoe for a weekend retreat. As fresh snow fell in soft drifts outside their cabin window, Timothy presented Bianca with a glittering diamond ring. He dropped to one knee, his voice tremoring with genuine emotion, and asked her to be his wife. Overjoyed, Bianca said yes, believing their love could weather anything. The proposal made headlines in local society papers, painting a fairy tale image of a struggling event coordinator turned soon-to-be millionaire's bride. But Timothy's bold, larger-than-life ambitions occasionally caused friction. He insisted on a lavish wedding in Napa Valley, with an exclusive guest list featuring star athletes, CEOs, and powerful politicians, people Bianca had never met. She preferred a more intimate celebration, focused on family and close friends. Tension arose over the wedding budget. Timothy had no problem spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, whereas Bianca, raised in a modest household, found the extravagance unsettling. Each disagreement was smoothed over by Timothy's charm or overshadowed by the excitement of planning. Little did Bianca know, these tiny warning bells were only the faintest echoes of what lay ahead. Meanwhile, Timothy's star continued to rise. He made strategic investments in multiple startups, diversifying his income and forging alliances with wealthy individuals across the globe. A mention of his name could open doors. Bianca, still new to high society, found some of his associates uncomfortably slick or overtly flirtatious. When she raised concerns, Timothy would laugh, insisting it was all part of the game. "They test you," he did say. "If you flinch, you lose." Their wedding took place in a sun-drenched vineyard, the kind of picture-perfect setting that ended up on the cover of California Bride magazine. Rows of white chairs lined a manicured lawn, flanked by pink and peach peonies. A string quartet played Vivaldi as Bianca walked the aisle in a designer gown that cost more than her parents' house. The presence of stars like actress Celia Harrington and NBA legend Robert Templeton gave the event an unearthly glow. Bianca's parents, Linda and Richard Saunders, were overwhelmed by the scale of it all, but beamed with pride nonetheless. During the vows, Timothy spoke passionately about partnership and honesty. He extolled Bianca's loving nature, promising her a life filled with devotion and generosity. The day felt magical, a storybook dream. Yet somewhere deep in her heart, Bianca sensed a creeping shadow, an unease she couldn't name. Timothy's vow to stand as equals rang a bit hollow when she glimpsed the $1 million archway behind him, or the swarm of paparazzi snapping photos. Still, she said, "I do," surrendering to love and the belief that this was just the beginning of something wondrous. That night, before they fell asleep, Timothy initiated a conversation that would later haunt Bianca. He laid out the idea of a prenuptial agreement in a calm, matter-of-fact tone, saying it was just a formality to protect his hard-earned assets. She hesitated. Signing felt like a betrayal of trust, a precaution that presumed the marriage might fail. However, Timothy soothed her concerns by promising it was just legal jargon. Naively, she signed. In that moment, all she wanted was to secure a harmonious future. If only she had known how that signature would shape the next chapter of her life. Married life began on a high note. The newlyweds honeymooned in Greece, drifting between Athens and Santorini. Timothy's affection was genuine. He woke Bianca with breakfast in bed, arranged private tours of ancient ruins, and danced with her barefoot under the moonlight. For 3 blissful weeks, they were inseparable, discovering not just foreign landscapes, but also deeper truths about one another. Bianca convinced herself that any lingering worries were just jitters overshadowed by the brilliance of what they had together. Upon returning home, reality came rushing back with a vengeance. Timothy's business demanded more of his time. He was often away on business trips, sometimes for days or even weeks. Late-night phone calls and urgent text messages about new deals became the norm. Bianca tried to adapt, refocusing her energy on volunteering at local shelters, and occasionally taking on smaller-scale event planning gigs to keep herself busy. But the loneliness crept in, like a chill wind, leaving her restless at night. She missed him, missed the ease of their early courtship. Things worsened when Timothy purchased a sprawling mansion in Palo Alto without consulting her. He saw it as the perfect place to raise a family with 10 bedrooms, an indoor pool, and cutting-edge security systems. Bianca felt overwhelmed by the distance from her own roots. Her parents still lived in a modest 2-bedroom cottage in San Leandro. She expressed her apprehension, but Timothy brushed aside her concerns, calling it an investment. Each day, the disparities in their perspectives grew clearer, leaving Bianca feeling more like a spectator than an equal partner in their marriage. One November afternoon, Bianca received a peculiar phone call from a woman who refused to identify herself. The caller only said, "Watch out for Timothy. He's not who you think he is," before abruptly hanging up. Troubled, Bianca tried to call back, but the number was blocked. She mentioned this to Carla, who urged caution, but also reasoned it could be a prank or a disgruntled ex-employee. When Bianca brought it up with Timothy, he frowned and insisted it was a hoax. "People are jealous," he told her. "They don't want to see us happy." Still, the seeds of suspicion had been planted. Bianca began noticing little things, texts arriving late at night that Timothy swiftly deleted, lunch receipts from places he'd supposedly never been, and an expensive bottle of perfume in his car's glove compartment that did not belong to her. Each anomaly had a convenient explanation: he'd done a favor for a colleague, or the receipts were from business associates. Yet Bianca's heart felt heavier with every half-truth. She longed for direct answers, but Timothy had a knack for turning her doubts into personal failings. She began to question her own judgment, feeling guilty for her paranoia. The tension escalated when Timothy missed their second anniversary dinner entirely. He called 2 hours late, apologizing profusely, claiming an emergency business meeting popped up. Bianca tried to mask her disappointment, but tears welled up in her eyes. She realized the glitz of being married to a millionaire came with a steep price, a sense of abandonment, distrust, and emotional isolation. Still, she fought to believe that love could triumph. She told herself that Timothy was simply under enormous pressure, and once things calmed down, they'd rediscover each other. As time passed, Carla's concern for her friend grew. She invited Bianca over for coffee at her small, cozy apartment in Berkeley. They sat on Carla's worn-out couch, sipped lattes, and talked candidly. Carla voiced her suspicion that Timothy might be unfaithful. Instead of dismissing the possibility, Bianca found herself silent tears rolling down her cheeks. She confessed she wasn't sure anymore. Carla gently urged Bianca to collect evidence before confronting him, reminding her that a divorce, especially involving a prenup, could get ugly. Bianca felt torn. She still loved Timothy, clinging to the hope that their marriage was merely going through a rough patch. But if there was a betrayal, she needed to know. Taking Carla's advice, Bianca began documenting odd occurrences in a private journal. She even went so far as to install a GPS tracker on Timothy's car, an act that filled her with guilt. But she felt compelled to protect herself. Weeks of clandestine logging yielded inconclusive results. Timothy traveled to standard business locations, fancy restaurants, hotels. Then on a frigid January night, the tracker pinpointed Timothy's car at a luxurious villa in Malibu, far from the office he was supposedly stuck in. Bianca's heart throbbed with dread. She called him only to be sent to voicemail repeatedly. The next morning, Timothy acted as if nothing was amiss. Bianca's smile cracked under the weight of suspicion. That same day, she made an appointment with a private detective named Eleanor Grant, a sharp-witted former cop known for her steely resolve. Eleanor Grant had unraveled many scandals within the Bay Area elite. She was in her 40s, dressed in practical pantsuits, and possessed a penetrating gaze that could unsettle even the bravest men. After hearing Bianca's woes, she offered a kind but firm response. "I can help, but I want you to be sure, because once I uncover the truth, there's no turning back." Bianca swallowed hard and nodded. She handed Eleanor the logs, the tracker data, and a brief overview of Timothy's schedule. "I just need the truth," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't want to accuse him unfairly, but I can't live in doubt anymore." For the next month, Eleanor shadowed Timothy. She followed him to corporate meetings, discreet lunches, and star-studded charity events. She noted suspicious rendezvous with a stunning brunette at a 5-star hotel in Los Angeles. Eleanor photographed them laughing closely in a private booth, the woman's hand resting on Timothy's knee. Bianca's heart sank when she saw the images her husband gazing at another woman with that same intensity she once believed was reserved only for her. Pain melded with outrage, and she realized her intuition had not failed her. Yet the question remained: how would she confront him? Determined to confront Timothy, Bianca planned a candlelit dinner at home, hoping the intimate setting would help him open up. She cooked his favorite meal, filet mignon, with a Cabernet reduction, and wore the sapphire earrings he'd gifted her on their first anniversary. When Timothy arrived late as usual, she calmly sat him down and showed him the photographs. She expected a confession, perhaps even remorse. Instead, Timothy responded with cold fury. He accused her of betrayal for hiring a detective. He called her insecure, clingy, and paranoid. Bianca felt her anger rising, but he used his practiced confidence to turn the situation around, insinuating that she was the one endangering their marriage by violating his privacy. The more he stonewalled, the more uncertain Bianca felt. Before she could press him further, Timothy stormed out, slamming the door behind him. That night, Bianca cried herself to sleep. She woke the next morning to discover Timothy had left for a week-long business trip in Europe. He didn't bother to say goodbye or address their argument. Confusion warred with heartbreak. For the first time, Bianca felt the glimmer of wanting to leave him. But a single event would soon render her decision far more complicated. Just days after Timothy's departure, Bianca fell severely ill. Nausea struck her in sudden waves, and she found herself hunched over the toilet multiple times a day. At first, she blamed stress, but Carla insisted she take a pregnancy test. A whirlwind of emotions swirled in Bianca as she stared at the positive result. Against all odds, and despite their strained marriage, she was pregnant. Bianca's initial reaction was a powerful mixture of joy and terror. She had always wanted children, but the timing felt cruel. After all, how could she navigate an already crumbling marriage while carrying Timothy's child? Nonetheless, a maternal protectiveness stirred within her. No matter what transpired between her and Timothy, she wanted to give this baby a chance to be loved unconditionally. Reaching Timothy over the phone proved impossible. Calls went straight to voicemail, texts remained unread. Eventually, she sent him a concise message. "We need to talk, urgent." He never responded. Forced to confront her doctor's appointments alone, Bianca felt an eerie loneliness creeping into her life, overshadowed only by the fierce desire to protect the life growing inside her. When Timothy finally returned home, Bianca was eager to share the pregnancy news in person. She had prepared a letter she'd intended to read aloud, detailing her fears, hopes, and the unconditional love she wanted their child to receive. She hoped that fatherhood would inspire Timothy to change, or at least to open his heart. But her hopes were shattered the moment Timothy walked through the door. He carried an expensive briefcase and 2 new designer suits barely acknowledging her. His gaze was distant eyes, scanning the foyer, as if expecting a confrontation. Gathering her courage, Bianca told him she was pregnant. His reaction was chillingly indifferent. His eyes widened for an instant, and then he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Okay, well, let's make sure it's yours and mine," he said, his voice dripping with suspicion. Bianca's breath caught in her throat. Of all the cruel responses, that was the last thing she expected. She pressed him, demanding an explanation, but he merely shrugged. "You want me to forget you hired a detective, spied on me? Maybe it wasn't just me who was unfaithful." His words were meant to wound, and they succeeded. Bianca felt shattered, as if every hope she'd clung to had been ripped away. In that moment, she knew their marriage was a charade, a hollow facade of what it used to be. In the days that followed, Timothy made half-hearted attempts to appear supportive of the pregnancy. He accompanied Bianca to a single doctor's appointment, but spent most of the time texting on his phone. He feigned delight when the ultrasound confirmed their baby was healthy, yet his forced smiles and abrupt mood changes only deepened her unease. It was as though Timothy was torn between an obligatory sense of responsibility and a desire to maintain his bachelor-style freedom. Behind closed doors, Timothy began speaking in clipped tones about the possibility of a DNA test. He argued it was standard procedure for wealthy men. Bianca felt outraged, but she lacked the energy for a continuous fight. Pregnancy was already sapping her strength. She realized Timothy's tactic emotional manipulation. He was painting her as the untrustworthy one, despite clear evidence of his infidelity. Carla, concerned for Bianca's well-being, urged her to consider leaving. She emphasized that stress could harm both the mother and unborn child. Conflicted Bianca reeled with guilt, fear, and heartbreak. Deep down, she still loved the man she believed Timothy once was. But the more she tried to salvage the relationship, the more it became clear that Timothy's heart was locked away if he even had it in him to love sincerely anymore. Eleanor Grant's final investigation report arrived in a plain envelope slipped under Bianca's doorstep late one evening. Bianca's hands trembled as she read through detailed accounts of Timothy's affair with a woman named Raquel Sumner, an up-and-coming model and socialite known for her ties to affluent executives. The photographs showed them embracing at a private bungalow in Malibu, attending secret dinners, even sneaking into high-end boutiques together. Dates and timelines aligned almost too well with Timothy's business trips. Worse yet, the report hinted that Timothy had paid substantial sums to Raquel's personal accounts. Money that likely didn't come from legitimate business. Bank statements displayed suspicious transfers, labeled as consulting fees. The betrayal struck Bianca like a physical blow. All the illusions she had built her life around came crashing down. She might have confronted Timothy then and there, but he was absent again. Off on another business trip, this time in Las Vegas. Bianca's stomach churned. She was pregnant with the child of a man living a double life while she suffered alone, overshadowed by the opulence that once entranced her. She considered the possibility that it might be time to escape before the situation worsened. But a single phone call changed everything. Timothy's attorney reached out to her, inquiring about her marital demands, a subtle threat that hinted at an impending legal battle. The next morning, Bianca sat in the law office of Margaret Pierce, a formidable family lawyer with a reputation for championing the underdog. Grey-haired with a regal posture, Margaret examined the prenuptial agreement Bianca had signed. Her eyebrows furrowed. The document heavily favored Timothy. It stipulated minimal alimony, limited property rights, and a meager settlement if Bianca ever filed for divorce. Bianca's heart sank, realizing she had trusted Timothy blindly, never expecting their love story might end in a courtroom. Margaret, however, found potential loopholes, particularly concerning Timothy's possible marital misconduct and the unborn child's financial needs. California law places high priority on child support, she explained. If we can prove infidelity, cruelty, or that he concealed certain assets, we have grounds to challenge the prenup. But it won't be easy. Bianca shuddered at the idea of a protracted legal war. She wanted a peaceful resolution for the sake of her unborn child's future. Margaret recommended they first reach out to Timothy with a structured settlement, but Bianca hesitated, uncertain if Timothy would even consider a fair compromise. Still, she agreed to Margaret's plan, hoping that a cordial dialogue might be possible before the fight escalated. Margaret sent a letter to Timothy's legal team, outlining Bianca's request for financial security, during her pregnancy, prenatal and postnatal support, and an arrangement that would allow her to remain in the Palo Alto home until the child reached adulthood. She also demanded Timothy attend counseling. The demands were modest, given Timothy's vast fortune, but they were essential to Bianca's stability. Timothy's response came swiftly, and it was frigid, a stark refusal. His letter claimed that Bianca had violated his trust, tried to fabricate evidence, and was now attempting to extort money. He offered a small monthly allowance, insufficient even for basic living expenses in Palo Alto. The letter concluded with a veiled threat. If Bianca pursued legal action, Timothy wouldn't hesitate to use every legal resource to defend himself. Devastated, Bianca felt trapped. She was carrying his child, yet faced a future overshadowed by a legal war. Despite Margaret's reassurances, Bianca worried about how she would pay for a lengthy trial. Meanwhile, her doctor cautioned her that stress was impacting her health. The baby's well-being now depended on her finding a path forward that minimized emotional turmoil. Yet every route seemed fraught with conflict. A week later, Margaret received an unexpected phone call from a paralegal affiliated with Timothy's lawyer. The paralegal disclosed an explosive piece of information. Raquel Sumner, Timothy's mistress, allegedly had a pregnancy scare. The details were murky, but rumor had it Timothy might have pressured her to terminate if she was pregnant. When Bianca heard this news, she felt sickened. If it was true, it painted Timothy as even more callous than she imagined. That he would push one pregnant woman aside and potentially coerce another to terminate was monstrous. Margaret's legal mind raced with implications. If Raquel was pregnant, or even claimed to be, she might possess valuable leverage against Timothy. Perhaps she could be compelled to testify, revealing the truth about Timothy's duplicity and undermining his credibility in court. Although Bianca hated the idea of dragging another woman into her legal battle, she realized Raquel might hold the key to ensuring her own baby's future was protected. Margaret initiated an informal inquiry, aiming to connect with Raquel's lawyers, if she had any. Simultaneously, Bianca struggled with guilt. She found herself pitying Raquel, who was younger and clearly enthralled by Timothy's wealth. Yet a burning anger simmered under her sadness. How dare Raquel intrude on her marriage, knowingly or not? As the legal pressure mounted, Timothy's behavior grew more aggressive. He stopped sleeping at the Palo Alto mansion, preferring to stay in hotel suites or at his penthouse in San Francisco. Security cameras around the estate were suddenly updated without Bianca's knowledge, heightening her sense of paranoia. Even the household staff, once so warm to her, seemed to follow Timothy's directives. One afternoon, Bianca encountered the gardener, Alejandro Fuentes, who hinted that Timothy had requested all staff report Bianca's activities back to him. Disgusted by this betrayal, Bianca grew more isolated. She limited her movements, terrified that any misstep could escalate the conflict. Her only solace was Carla, who visited daily to keep her company. Over time, the mansion felt more like a gilded cage, its lavish decor mocking her with illusions of prosperity. Despite his stone-cold demeanor, Timothy sporadically called to hurl insults or threaten her financially. He insisted she'd never find an attorney who could beat him, that the baby might not even be his, and that she was ungrateful for all he'd provided. Each accusation cut Bianca deeper. She might have had second thoughts, if not for the unconditional love she felt for her unborn child. That love propelled her to stay firm, to fight to believe that justice would find a way, if only she had the courage. A summons arrived indicating that Timothy sought to enforce the prenuptial agreement immediately. He filed a motion to establish that Bianca was not entitled to any spousal support beyond a token sum as outlined in the prenup. Additionally, He demanded a DNA test the moment the child was born to confirm paternity. The legal jargon was dizzying, but the message was clear. Timothy intended to crush her in court. Margaret responded in kind, filing counter-motions, challenging the prenup on grounds of fraud and duress, pointing out that Timothy's concealment of his affair at the time of signing could constitute a significant factor. She also reminded the court that child support in California is typically determined by statutory guidelines, not preempted by a prenuptial agreement. A hearing was scheduled for late spring. As the date approached, Bianca's belly grew, and so did her anxiety. She spent sleepless nights pacing her ornate bedroom, wrestling with fear and anger. Carla's frequent visits provided a glimmer of hope. Together they prayed that some miracle or twist of fate would bring Timothy to reason. Alternatively, they hoped that Margaret's strategic brilliance could shift the balance of power. In early April, Margaret announced she had made contact with Raquel's representatives. Raquel was initially combative, furious about being dragged into Timothy's marital drama. But she changed her tune when she learned Timothy was not supporting her and had allegedly cut ties after her pregnancy scare. A rumor circulated that Raquel had been threatened into silence, forced to sign a non-disclosure agreement. However, Margaret discovered that Raquel's NDA might be legally unenforceable in certain contexts, especially if she was subpoenaed in a family law case. Hearing that Timothy had essentially discarded her, Raquel felt betrayed. She reached out personally to Margaret, explaining how Timothy had promised her gifts, vacations, and even the down payment on a Beverly Hills condo if she remained discreet. She said she'd never intended to break up a marriage. She'd been dazzled by Timothy's money and charm. Ultimately, she realized he was using her for selfish pleasure. Raquel hesitated to testify, but hinted that if the court ordered it, she would tell the truth. Bianca's conflicting emotions resurfaced: pity, anger, validation. Margaret reassured her client that Raquel's testimony might be the linchpin that tilts the case in Bianca's favor. Privately, Bianca mused over how heartbreak could become such a powerful tool in a legal battleground. The preliminary hearing was held in a stately courtroom in downtown San Francisco. Rows of pew-like benches faced a raised dais where Judge Eloise Harlington presided with an air of unwavering authority. Timothy arrived with a team of high-priced attorneys, each clad in expensive suits and armed with thick portfolios. Bianca, visibly pregnant, stood beside Margaret, her heart pounding so loudly she feared everyone could hear it. Timothy's lead attorney, a silver-haired litigator named Clayton Brooks, argued passionately to uphold the prenuptial agreement portraying Bianca as a gold digger who had manipulated Timothy. Margaret countered with evidence of Timothy's affair, the suspicious bank transfers, and a timeline that demonstrated Timothy had withheld crucial information when Bianca signed the prenup. She insisted that the agreement was procured under false pretenses. Then Margaret dropped the bombshell she had Raquel's signed statement, and if the case proceeded, she intended to call Raquel as a witness. The mention of Raquel's name sent a ripple of unease through Timothy's team. Timothy's face twisted, but he maintained a stoic facade. Judge Harlington took note of the tension and scheduled a follow-up evidentiary hearing during which Raquel could be subpoenaed. The next date was set for 2 weeks later, giving all parties time to prepare. After the hearing, Timothy flashed Bianca a venomous glare. He approached her in the hallway, fists clenched at his sides, whispering, "You'll regret this." His voice seethed with quiet menace. Bianca stood her ground, one hand protectively over her belly, feeling both fear and a strange sense of empowerment. She was no longer the naive bride. She was a mother, defending her child. Days after the hearing, Bianca received a call from an unknown number. Expecting another threat, she almost let it go to voicemail, but something compelled her to answer. It was Alexander Barrett, a venture capitalist who had once partnered with Timothy. He confessed that he'd witnessed Timothy's shady financial dealings, but had remained silent out of fear and greed. He'd grown disgusted by Timothy's tactics, particularly his willingness to manipulate and destroy people's lives. Now Alexander wanted to help. He provided Margaret with documents showing Timothy had falsified income statements, squirreled money into offshore accounts, and laundered funds through shell corporations. These documents not only bolstered Bianca's case for spousal support, they also exposed Timothy to potential criminal liability. Alarmed by how far Timothy had gone, Margaret moved swiftly to incorporate this new evidence into their arguments. When Bianca thanked Alexander, he sounded weary. "I regret being part of Timothy's empire for so long," he said. "But I can't stand by and watch him ruin more lives." Bianca sensed the sincerity in his voice. It wasn't just her legal battle that was shifting public sentiment, might also turn against Timothy, especially if the press caught wind of his misconduct. For the first time, Bianca felt the stirrings of real hope. Word of the upcoming evidentiary hearing spread among gossip columns and tech blogs. Timothy's name was well known in the Bay Area, and the notion of a millionaire embroiled in a scandalous court case ignited the public's curiosity. Reporters camped outside the Palo Alto mansion, cameras at the ready. Bianca's phone buzzed relentlessly, with calls from journalists seeking an exclusive. Paparazzi photos surfaced of her leaving prenatal checkups, her expression tired and wary. Margaret advised her to remain silent and composed in public, to avoid any mistakes that might undermine her credibility in court. Friends, acquaintances, even distant relatives began reaching out, curious about the drama unfolding. Carla stood as a protective shield, handling some of Bianca's calls and urging others to respect her privacy. Meanwhile, Timothy appeared on a popular business podcast, deflecting any mention of his personal life. He portrayed himself as a misunderstood mogul, a victim of baseless allegations. But the cracks in his facade were beginning to show. His harshness, once disguised by charm, seeped into every public appearance. Some critics on social media labeled him the new Gordon Gekko, referencing the fictional unscrupulous tycoon from film. As the court date loomed, tensions reached a fever pitch. The long-awaited evidentiary hearing arrived. Cameras flashed outside the courthouse as Bianca, heavily pregnant, entered arm in arm with Margaret. Timothy arrived separately, wearing a designer suit and a combative scowl. In the packed courtroom, you could sense the anticipation. After a flurry of procedural motions, Margaret called Raquel Sumner to the stand. The young woman, visibly nervous, approached the witness box. Timothy's eyes darted, his jaw clenched. Under oath, Raquel admitted to a year-long affair, detailing how Timothy had funded her lavish lifestyle, provided hush money, and even arranged a private doctor's visit when she thought she was pregnant. She confessed she'd initially refused to testify, but Timothy's abandonment and Bianca's plight changed her mind. Next, Margaret introduced Alexander Barrett's financial documents, which vividly depicted Timothy's asset concealment and offshore trickery. Timothy's lawyers scrambled to object, but the judge admitted the evidence, warning them to save their counter-arguments for cross-examination. A hush fell over the courtroom as document after document painted a dark picture of Timothy's duplicity. During cross-examination, Timothy's attorney tried to discredit Raquel, labeling her a gold digger and insinuating she'd orchestrated a false pregnancy scare for money. Raquel stood her ground, even shedding tears when describing Timothy's manipulations. The emotional weight in the room was palpable. It was as though the entire courthouse realized the full scope of Timothy's betrayal. At Margaret's insistence, Timothy was called to testify. He swaggered to the witness box, but the confidence that once made him formidable seemed tainted. Clayton Brooks guided him through a rehearsed defense. He claimed the affair was consensual, purely recreational, and that Bianca had known of it from the start. He denied strong-arming. Raquel insisted the suspicious financial transactions were legitimate business deals, and suggested that Alexander Barrett was acting out of vengeance because of a failed investment partnership. Then Margaret took the reins, and Timothy's composure began to unravel. She fired off questions about the prenuptial agreement. Did he disclose his affair before Bianca signed it? No. Did he reveal his offshore accounts and manipulated finances? No. Was he aware Raquel had a possible pregnancy scare? Yes, but he claimed it was none of Bianca's business. Each answer chipped away at his credibility. At one point, Margaret confronted him with damning text messages obtained through subpoena, where Timothy had explicitly threatened Raquel, warning her to keep quiet or face legal and financial ruin. The judge's stern gaze fell on Timothy as he mumbled flimsy justifications. The tension in the room was near suffocating. After hours of testimony, Judge Harlington called both legal teams to her chambers for a private conference. When they emerged, she delivered a preliminary ruling from the bench. The prenuptial agreement's validity was in serious doubt due to Timothy's failure to disclose significant assets and the existence of an extramarital affair. The judge also indicated that if these allegations were substantiated, Timothy could face harsh penalties, including the possibility of Bianca being awarded spousal support and significant child support retroactive to the date of separation. Furthermore, the judge strongly encouraged the parties to attempt mediation, warning that if this went to trial, Timothy risked an even more staggering defeat. For the first time, Timothy appeared genuinely shaken. His attorneys conferred in hushed tones, trying to maintain some semblance of damage control. Meanwhile, Bianca exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. This wasn't a final victory, far from it, but it was a critical turning point. She'd stood before the court, brandishing the truth, and had not been dismissed. Outside the courthouse, Raquel caught up with Bianca. She looked drained but determined. "I'm sorry," she said, tears shining in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could trust him." Bianca nodded, too emotional for words. She placed a gentle hand on Raquel's shoulder, acknowledging the complicated pain they shared. Raquel went on to say she was moving to Europe. She hoped the press would eventually lose interest, allowing her to rebuild her life. "I wish you and your baby the best," she whispered, before slipping into a waiting car. Watching her leave, Bianca felt a fragile sense of closure, two women bound by the same man's deceit, now forging separate paths. Under the court's directive, Timothy and Bianca participated in a mediated session the following week. The mediator was a grey-bearded retired judge named Philip Matthews, who commanded the room with a calm presence. Timothy's lawyers started by offering a modest settlement, barely enough to cover Bianca's living expenses for a year. Margaret shot it down, countering with a figure proportionate to Timothy's hidden wealth. Timothy's voice dripped with sarcasm. "You're not going to turn me into an ATM." Margaret, unyielding, fired back that the child deserved a stable upbringing that Timothy's wealth could afford. The back and forth continued for hours, each side refusing to budge. Finally, seeing the stalemate, the mediator suggested they break for a private conversation. Bianca, nervous, agreed to talk with Timothy alone in a small room with only the mediator present. The tension was thick. Timothy looked exhausted, eyes hollow. Bianca felt her pulse racing. In a momentary lapse of hostility, Timothy admitted he had been wrong. He confessed to feeling trapped by wealth power and the constant expectation to be on top. He said he'd lost sight of what truly mattered. "But I can't just give everything up," he insisted. "This is my life's work." Bianca's eyes welled with tears. "What about our child's life?" she asked. The question hung in the air. Timothy offered no clear answer. Despite the mediator's best efforts, the two failed to reach an agreement. Timothy's attorneys feared a public trial might expose more damaging secrets. Bianca's team was prepared to go the distance if necessary. Tensions soared. Margaret braced Bianca for a grueling legal process that could last months, even years, draining both parties emotionally and financially. Outside the mediation room, Timothy hissed a quiet threat. "If you keep this up, I'll make sure you never see a dime." Margaret intervened before Bianca could respond, reminding Timothy that such intimidation could be deemed harassment. Timothy let out a sardonic chuckle and walked away. His confidence wasn't entirely gone. It had simply morphed into spite. In the midst of the chaos, Alexander Barrett reappeared with more intel. He mentioned that Timothy had made enemies among other venture capitalists and startup founders. One of these enemies, an influential figure named Serena Lee, agreed to provide testimony about Timothy's unethical practices if Bianca's case proceeded to trial. This revelation put even more pressure on Timothy. He was already teetering at the edge of scandal. Additional testimonies could demolish his empire. Margaret used this leverage in negotiations, subtly hinting that the avalanche of witnesses would only grow. Timothy's attorneys grew visibly uneasy. They recognized that the more they fought, the more dirt would be exposed, and the bigger the potential damage to Timothy's net worth and reputation. Still, Timothy's stubbornness refused to yield. Weeks passed with no resolution. Bianca, now in her final trimester, found the stress unbearable. Her doctor warned of complications if her anxiety persisted. One late night, while Bianca was resting in bed, she heard her phone buzz. It was a text from an unknown number. "Meet me at the Redwood Inn parking lot tomorrow at 10 p.m. Come alone." Despite her misgivings, something in her gut told her it was Timothy. She confided in Carla and Margaret, who warned her not to go. But Bianca needed answers, a final attempt at peace. The next night, she drove alone to the run-down motel, heart hammering in her chest. Sure enough, Timothy stood under a flickering neon sign, eyes darting nervously. He proposed a private settlement, no lawyers, no court. He'd pay her a lump sum of $5 million and guarantee generous child support. On one condition, she would sign an ironclad NDA, preventing any disclosure of his wrongdoing. He even offered to let her keep the Palo Alto mansion until the child turned 18. "This is more than fair," he pleaded, desperation in his tone. Bianca stared at him, a swirl of emotions tearing her apart. $5 million could secure her child's future, yet the idea of staying silent, letting Timothy evade accountability, felt like a betrayal of her own values. She needed time to think. She told him she'd consider it, leaving him trembling under the motel's dim light. Bianca spent sleepless nights agonizing over Timothy's offer. She spoke to Margaret, who warned that such a private deal might shield Timothy from broader legal responsibility, but it would guarantee Bianca's financial security. Carla urged her to reject it, pointing out that Timothy was only doing this to protect his reputation. Caught between moral duty and maternal protectiveness, Bianca felt paralyzed. But everything changed one evening when she experienced severe abdominal pain. She collapsed in the mansion's hallway. Rushed to the hospital, doctors discovered she was at risk of preterm labor. The stress had reached a critical point, jeopardizing her baby's health. Through labored breaths, she realized she couldn't keep living with her life in limbo. As she lay in the hospital bed, she made a vow to stand firm. She would not be bullied or bought off, if protecting her child meant continuing the fight she would endure. She told Margaret to move forward, rejecting Timothy's hush money offer. The next day, a final trial date was set, with the judge emphasizing that both parties had failed to find common ground. The final trial commenced in the same grand courtroom, but the atmosphere was entirely different. The press gallery was packed, and the tension felt electric. Margaret presented a succinct but devastating case evidence of Timothy's hidden wealth testimony from Raquel Alexander Barrett's documents and the prenuptial agreement's glaring omissions. Timothy's lawyers attempted to poke holes, but their counter-arguments lacked conviction. When it came time for closing statements, Margaret spoke with quiet fervor about betrayal responsibility and the future of the unborn child. Clayton Brooks, representing Timothy, blustered about contract law and personal freedom. But the judge seemed unmoved. In a stern voice, Judge Harlington delivered her verdict. She declared the prenuptial agreement invalid due to fraudulent concealment of assets. She ordered Timothy to provide substantial spousal support to Bianca retroactive to the date of separation, plus comprehensive child support to begin upon the baby's birth. The judge also encouraged the district attorney to review Timothy's financial dealings for potential criminal activity. Finally, she admonished Timothy for his contemptuous behavior, warning that any further harassment could lead to additional penalties. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room. Bianca slumped in relief, tears streaming down her cheeks. Timothy sat stone-faced, staring at the floor, his carefully curated world crumbling before him. Outside the courthouse, reporters bombarded Bianca with questions. Margaret whisked her away, advising minimal comment. Camera lights flashed like 1,000 tiny explosions, but Bianca felt a strange calmness. Carla met her on the courthouse steps, enveloping her in a hug. Together they drove to the hospital to ensure Bianca's condition remained stable. The baby was due in just a few weeks. In the weeks following the trial, Timothy's empire reeled under intense scrutiny. Several business partners distanced themselves, citing moral clauses and trust issues. Rumors abounded that Timothy might have to sell some of his prized assets to cover legal fees and the court's financial awards. He vanished from the public eye, rumored to be living quietly in a remote property in Montana. For Bianca, the end of the trial marked the beginning of a new chapter. She was still healing from the emotional devastation, but she felt hopeful. She was free from the suffocating marriage and had a strong support system in Carla Margaret and her own parents. Most importantly, her child had a chance at a stable future, free from the toxic environment Timothy had created. Bianca gave birth on a crisp spring morning after hours of labor that tested every ounce of her resolve. The sterile brightness of the hospital room melted into a blur as her newborn son's first cry pierced the air, a fragile, beautiful sound that shattered months of pain. The nurses wrapped him in a pale blue blanket and gently placed him in her arms. She named him Julian Emmanuel Reynolds, choosing Emmanuel to honor the meaning God is with us, because she had felt alone for so long, but not anymore. Holding him, she was no longer just a woman who had survived a betrayal. She was a mother with a future. His cheeks were plump and flushed, his fingers barely thicker than toothpicks, but they curled tightly around hers as if clinging to her heartbeat. Bianca wept, but not from sorrow. These were tears of release, of transformation. Every sacrifice, every legal battle, every night she'd cried alone in the mansion had led to this moment. The hospital allowed her a few quiet days to recover. Carla never left her side. She brought flowers from Bianca's parents, homemade soup, and soft music to fill the sterile space with comfort. When Bianca looked out the window from her hospital bed, watching cherry blossoms dance in the wind, she realized she hadn't felt peace in years. After being discharged, Bianca moved into a charming 3-bedroom home in Pleasanton, a peaceful suburb closer to her parents. The home had a sunlit nursery, painted in soft pastels, and a garden out back, where she hoped to plant roses. It wasn't as lavish as the Palo Alto mansion, but it felt infinitely more like home. Here, she didn't feel like a guest in someone else's empire. She was building her own. Carla moved in temporarily to help. Every day was a whirlwind, feeding schedules, diaper changes, midnight cries. But they laughed too. They danced barefoot in the kitchen during naps, took turns reading aloud from parenting books, and sometimes just sat in silence, watching Julian sleep, overwhelmed by the serenity of it all. And still there were moments of grief. Sometimes Bianca found herself staring into space, thinking of Timothy, not in longing, but in reflection. She couldn't forget how he once held her hand, how he used to whisper promises into her ear. But those memories were now like artifacts from another life. The man who laughed at her pleas, who chose greed over love, was not the man she once fell for. That realization brought clarity, not bitterness. She had no illusions that the road ahead would be easy. There would be custody conversations, awkward transitions, and likely more attempts by Timothy to assert control. But now Bianca wasn't afraid. She'd stood in the storm and come out stronger. One afternoon, as she breastfed Julian by the window, Carla walked in with 2 mugs of tea. "You know," she said with a smile, "you're the strongest person I know." Bianca looked down at Julian and smiled. "No. I just had the right reason to fight." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind forged only by those who had walked through fire together. Outside, the wind swayed the trees, and Bianca knew this was a new season. Sometimes, she still thought back to that night at the Oakland Charity Gala, where she met Timothy in his Armani suit, where fairy tales seemed possible. It used to haunt her how naive she'd been, how easily she fell for his charm. But now she saw it differently. That night, that love, that pain, it had led her here. To Julian. And she wouldn't trade him for anything. Motherhood wasn't just healing her wounds. It was forging a new identity. She began journaling again, writing letters to Julian for him to read one day. Letters about truth, love mistakes, and the power of standing up when others expect you to break. She didn't want him to grow up resenting his father, but she wanted him to understand who his mother was, the woman who refused to be silenced. Bianca enrolled in an online certification program to get back into event planning. She wasn't in a rush. Her primary focus was Julian, but rebuilding her career was a symbol of reclaiming her dreams. Margaret checked in occasionally, always reminding her that she had legal protection now, and Carla encouraged her to consider writing a memoir. "You've lived through something people need to hear," Carla told her. Women in silence. Women who feel stuck. You could be their voice. Bianca didn't know if she was ready for that, but maybe someday. For now, she found joy in the small things: Julian's giggles during bath time, the scent of his hair after a nap, the way he looked up at her, as though she was the only thing in the world that mattered. She no longer defined herself by the war she fought, but by the peace she was building. Every morning she stood by the window, Julian in her arms, whispering a quiet promise. "I'll protect you. I'll raise you with love and truth and strength." And as the sun filtered through the glass, casting golden halos over mother and child, it was clear Bianca hadn't just survived. She had begun again. Months later, Bianca sat at her kitchen table, penning a heartfelt letter to Julian, something he would read when he was old enough to understand. In it, she explained how she fought for him before he was even born, how wealth could corrupt even the brightest souls, and how courage could triumph over intimidation. She confessed her love, reminding him that he was the beacon guiding her through the darkest of times. She also wrote about forgiveness, not for Timothy's sake, but for her own. Carrying hate would only poison her heart and overshadow her new life. She acknowledged that Timothy was Julian's father, and one day Julian might want to know him. If that day came, Bianca promised not to stand in the way as long as Timothy approached it with honesty. In forging her new path, Bianca wasn't naive to the challenges ahead. She had to navigate co-parenting arrangements, potential visitation schedules, and the emotional aftermath of a toxic marriage. But she faced these hurdles with a calm assurance grounded in the knowledge that she'd emerged from the chaos with dignity, justice, and the sweetest little boy in her arms. Bianca's story is a testament to the power of truth and resilience. Despite suffering betrayal and humiliation at the hands of her millionaire husband, she reclaimed her life by shining a light on secrets that threatened to destroy her. In the end, her determination and the brave testimonies of unlikely allies brought justice to a battle many thought she could never win. Now she devotes her days to raising her son, with unwavering love, forging a peaceful new beginning far from the turmoil of Timothy's world. Thank you for joining us on this emotional roller coaster. If Bianca's journey inspired you, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal or the triumph of overcoming impossible odds, please hit that like button, share this story with friends who need a spark of hope, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life drama and heartwarming tales. Your support makes all the difference. Together, let's keep these stories alive.